Hey everybody out there, my name is Dragnix, and I set my critical eye today on A Quiver of Crows. It came out on October 19th, 2016 for $14.99, and it's a twin-stick shoot-'em-up with a very unique style, and it has you playing as a crow, fighting various enemies of various forms, whether it be big skeleton men or just things that bite at your ankles. And yes, crows have ankles even though they have sort of talons, and you know what I mean. Anyway, before I begin this review, I want to make sure you know that this key was obtained for the developer for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? Okay, the basics of the shoot-'em-up genre are in Quiver of Crows. You can fire via the right analog stick if you're using a controller, or the mouse and keyboard, you use the mouse and aim your reticle on the screen. Now, for the purposes of this review, I mostly played with the controller because it's what the game recommended. However, I do think the mouse and keyboard actually works a little bit better here just because of the aiming accuracy you will need, especially in later levels. Regardless of what control scheme you use, you have two weapon slots. You have a primary weapon slot and a secondary weapon slot. Now, the secondary weapon slot I'll start with. You have a specific amount of ammo that you can find in the stage with it, and they're sort of your get-out-of-jail-free cards. It could be something like an explosion up close, or a bunch of feathers that will home in on enemies. They are used to get you out of panic situations, and trust me, you're gonna have a lot of panic situations in A Quiver of Crows. Now, for the primary weapons, things are a little bit different. You have infinite ammo for these weapons, and as you progress through the game, you will get upgrades for these weapons. So for example, you start the game with this sort of fireball attack. Yes, I know it's not a fireball, it's not orange, but it's the best way that I can describe this compared to the other ones. But as you progress through the game, you'll also get a laser attack, which does a little bit more damage than the regular fireball attack, and it goes a little bit faster, so it seems like a full upgrade of the fireball attack that you start with. Then later on, you'll get the fast forward attack. Yes, that's the best way I can describe it. It's the fast forward symbol on the VCR, for those who actually remember VCRs, and it just keeps on going and going and going, making this horrible sound that I really wish I could turn off without turning off anything else, because it sort of digs into your brain. Now, you can switch between these weapons at any time, and you're probably saying to yourself, Dragnix, why would I want to switch between the weapons? You just told me that each weapon upgrade seems to be a little bit more powerful and fire a little bit faster, and that's true, but within each weapon type, there's also an upgrade system. Enemies will drop these upgrade orbs, and these upgrade orbs start to give a little bit more damage to each weapon, but in particular start to give them a little bit more personality. For example, that original fireball attack starts to become a spread attack. It's very useful when you've got multiple enemies coming from angles, as opposed to the fast forward attack, which just goes a little bit faster and does a lot more damage with the upgrade. Now, at its core, that is good design. Let the player choose which weapon is right for each situation. If the spread shot does a lot more damage because it's able to have more over an area, then okay, choose that. If you don't choose the right weapon, punish the player because, hey, you chose the lasers even though you probably should have chosen the fast forward. The enemy design also does help this. For example, there are these like ant-like creatures that are able to fly, and the thing is you'll want to use the spread shot on them because they're so hard to hit with a singular laser or a singular fast forward. But the spread shot is able to do a little bit more over an area, and thus you'll probably hit the one hit that you need to take him down. Enemy variety as a whole is one of the strengths of Quiver of Crows. For example, you get these little spiked enemies that are able to throw slow but methodical spikes at you. If you're close to them, you're probably going to get hit, but trying to actually hit them from long range is a little bit challenging when you've got other enemies coming down your throat. So it's a good mixture of melee, it's a good mixture of range, and it's a good mixture of strategies overall. But you've probably been listening for the last several minutes and going, well, he's giving some praise to the game, but there seems to be a but around the corner, like he's holding something back. And yes, I have been, because unfortunately, one of the problems with this game is its enemy layout, its level design, and its overall respawn rate of enemies. Now, let me make this clear. Quiver of Crows is difficult, and difficulty and shmups sort of go hand in hand. But the thing is that there's fair difficulty, and there's unfair difficulty. Take a game like Mushi Hime-sama. It is a very, very hard Japanese shoot 'em up. And the thing is that you look at the screen and you go, oh god, that's unfair. There's no way anybody can get through that. But yes, you can. If you mechanize the patterns, if you're able to memorize the patterns and be able to dodge them in the right way, you're gonna get through the level every time. It just needs an insane level of precision. Note in that scenario, there is repeatability. There is an expectation that enemies will do the same patterns over and over again. Now let's move to A Quiver of Crows. AI in this game reacts to you, so if enemies are going at you and you change directions, they're probably going to change directions with you, which can be a good thing. But the reasons why it doesn't work in Quiver of Crows is several-fold. First of all, just the plain numbers that you get on screen, and in particular the respawn of enemies that you've already killed. Your firepower compared to the respawn rate seems to be underpowered. The fact is you can have 15 and 20 enemies fly at you at once, and you can only take down 2 or 3 of them at one time, and thus maybe 10 of them actually get close to you. And your health goes down very, very quickly, to the point where, hey, you're dead after a couple of bites. There's no real time to reset either. Even when you get through an area and everything seems to be okay, the thing is that there are enemies still spawning seemingly off screen. And so you have to keep up the pace, you have to keep up the tempo. But part of the problem with that tempo is that you can run into enemies very quickly coming off screen and charging towards you, and all of a sudden you've got a bunch of enemies on top of you. So you've got this sort of weird dynamic where you want to go fast, but you can't go fast because you're going to run into enemies. But there's going to be too many enemies if you don't go fast. You see how there's a problem there in terms of the flow? They don't work together very well. This is exasperated by one of the mechanics of the game, the corpses. When you kill an enemy, they don't just explode. Their corpse actually stays on the field and you can actually shoot it. And the fact is, I love those corpse mechanics. I love the fact that I can, play around with a corpse in the air and throw it around. But there's a cost to it with the type of enemies that you face here. The speed at which enemies rush you will actually carry corpses toward you, and they will take the brunt of beatings at times, which is a little bit of a problem because I can't fire on what's actually causing me damage, what's actually the threat in this case. Sure, it's fun to see the corpse sort of, get in your face, and you can even use it as a defensive mechanism yourself. But again, it overloads you to the point where you can't recover. What makes that even worse is the lack of hit detectors or hit sounds that are appropriate to the enemies that you're trying to kill. Now, when you kill an enemy, the light of red goes out of their eyes, which is usually their eyes. Sometimes maybe it's their main body, but it's mostly their eyes. And it's a very, very subtle hint of, oh, I need to kill this enemy. But even if I'm damaging an enemy, I really have no idea if I'm actually hurting him until that light goes out. So now you have this situation where you're firing and wondering why this enemy isn't dead, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh wait, I'm hitting a corpse. And now you've got to go through and, run around, try to avoid these enemies. By the way, avoiding those enemies means that more enemies are spawning in the background. Again, we have this circular problem where all these different mechanics don't work well together. That's the real problem with Quiver of Crows, is that you've got a bunch of interesting mechanics by themselves, but when you combine them together in a specific way, they don't work. Take example, the presentation. The black aesthetic in terms of enemies with the red eyes, like I mentioned before, is lovely to look at. There's a lot of lovely backgrounds and a lot of good artwork that is in Quiver of Crows. But again, the presentation sort of fights itself in terms of the gameplay. Take, for example, the lasers. Can you easily see these sort of circular lasers that these enemies are throwing at me right now? You probably needed to squint your eyes, and that's because you have a very, very light blue against a very, very light background. It blends in. I should be able to see these lasers so that I can dodge them right away. That does work in some levels with darker aesthetics, but they use the same color scheme in different areas that just doesn't work. The game never eases up on the gas pedal, and you really need that in this sort of game. Even in Mushihime-sama, even in Japanese shmups, you have those periods where the player can relax a little bit. The player can step back and say, okay, hold on a second, let me catch my breath. But in Quiver of Crows, you can't. It wants you to go fast. But the thing is that it also wants you to go slow. If you get hit by an enemy, you lose your upgrades, which, as I mentioned before, is a huge problem because you just don't have the choices to deal with all the other enemies then. Alright, I need to go slow and methodical, and fast and quick. Wait, hold on, what do you want me to do, game? And then there's things like the level design. Now there is good variety, you do have tight corridors at times along with big open areas, but the game never adjusts the enemies to be appropriate to those locations. The game is still spawning a bunch of enemies in those tight corridors, so you have this traffic jam of enemies that are just coming at you, and if corpses are coming at you as well, you just have major problems all around. Quiver of Crows is the perfect example of a game that's too difficult for its own good, because in a game like, let's say, Dark Souls 3, the difficulty is there, but it also feels fair, it also feels right with all the mechanics in question. Here, it does not. It seems like the game is giving you mixed signals, and thus you're sitting there going, why should I play this? You can't even tell me what you want me to do, so why should I even bother with your game? But here's the real kicker. When I was able to defeat a stage, I was able to free the birds that I needed to in order to unlock the final objective and get through the gate to go on to the next level, it didn't feel like it was entirely on me. It felt like Lady Luck played a huge part into what I was doing. Sure, I could react to all these situations. I could react to, these corpses flying at me, all these enemies flying at me, going fast, going slow. But I could never shake the feeling that this one run just had something special about it, and it didn't necessarily fall on me in order to do it. There is some genres that can work for, but not for the shmup genre, and in particular, not for a difficult shmup game. It just feels like you're wasting your time, and if that I really wanted a challenge, I'd go play Mushihime-sama. I'd go play something else that will reward me for playing well. Here, I just felt like I was sort of part of the flow. If it just so happens that it wanted me to win, so be it. And again, the sound design and the music design just doesn't carry the game. It feels sort of second nature. It feels like, okay, a lot were put into the visuals, a lot were put into these different mechanics, and the sound and music will just be there. Again, little things like the fast forward weapon just playing over and over again and just racking in your brain. I didn't want to use the weapon because of the sound effect. That's a problem. That's a huge problem, especially in a game like this. Normally, I would give an audience for who would really like Quiver of Crows, and part of me wants to say masochists who really want a challenge. But that's the thing, I fall into that category. I like games that give me challenge. I like games that I have to repeat over and over again and finally succeed. Games like Darkest Dungeon, for example. Here, I hated my experience after the first few levels. Yes, okay, you got a boss that's a bigger biter. Okay, great, except for the fact that it didn't really feel anything different, and I still felt like luck played too much of a part into me overcoming him. And at the $15 price tag, there are just too many other games that far succeed Quiver of Crows. Assault Android Cactus, games like Mushihime-sama, so on and so forth. Maybe the game would be worth something if the balance is restored, whether it be, through a little bit more powerful weaponry, whether it be through the adjustment of respawn rates, and I will keep an eye on it because there are some good mechanics here. But there are a lot of complaints on the forums right now, and it seems like the devs aren't listening to their player base, which is a problem. So I can't recommend Quiver of Crows at this time. Anyway, this is Dragnix signing out. I hope you found this video useful. If you liked this content, hit that like button, subscribe, all that jazz, and I will see you next week. I will start with an Overwatch Monday, and I am working on several reviews right now. I still have the Last Guardian review in my queue, the Gravity Rush 2 review, and because somebody decided to buy me a game, Resident Evil 7 is a game I will fully review. So I've got a bunch on my plate, and the job search, all that jazz, but for now, I will see you later.